All right, welcome everybody to Interview Thursday. I know it's been a little bit time here since the last one, but what better way to restart the broadcast than to have a wonderful guest such as Grandmaster Ron Henley here. Hello, Ron. How you doing today?
Fantastic so far, but hey, the day's yet young, so we'll see what happens.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us today. This is a truly a pleasure for me, especially since when I first started doing chess, you were the first commentator that I saw and really was interested in wanting to learn more about chess. So thank you.
Well, hopefully your career has recovered from that early setback.
So anyway, let's go ahead and get started and talk about you. What got you into chess and how you became a grandmaster?
Oh,
The whole
we
journey.
do have 5 or 6 hours, right?
Yeah.
No, actually, seriously, when I was about 6, I had some older stepbrothers, two brothers that were older, that were twins, an older sister, about 4 or 5 years older, and an older brother who was about 12. And so one Christmas, we got a game block. It's one of these blocks that's, about 2.5 feet squared all the way around. On one side, it had Chinese checkers. Another side, it had backgammon, Parcheesi, and there's a set of those hollowed plastic chess pieces,
Yeah.
kind of like the ones you get with the red and black square checkerboard at the old drugstore.
Yeah.
Yeah, really old school, right? And so anyway, the stepbrothers, they all learned, and then they taught my sister, and then she beat them, and then eventually it got around to me, and then when I beat all the stepbrothers, and then I beat my sister, she gave up. She's like, I'm losing to the youngest guy. I must not be any good. Little did she know. So, but then, that was in a day when we didn't have, internet. We didn't have YouTube videos and anything. So
Right.
basically, so from the time I was 6 to I was about 15, I had no idea about organized chess or
Hmm.
tournaments or anything. And so, but I beat my science teacher, I beat my neighbor, I beat the scoutmaster, I beat the kid down the block, I beat pretty much everyone,
Yeah.
except there's one cousin in Beaumont who I suspect actually played in tournaments but didn't tell me. And I won a couple of Variety Boys Club chess and checker championships. And I remember I got little tiny trophies, which my sister proudly carried on the trek from Houston to Beaumont to show all our aunts and everything.
Hmm.
But I never thought much about it. And then when I was about 14, I'm sitting in a barber shop in Houston. I'm a kid. You don't know what you don't know.
Right.
And I'm waiting for my next turn. And in those days, barber shops had a bunch of magazines, on the, usually like auto mechanic magazines and, town and country and, fish and stream. But there happened to be a chess magazine, Chess Life. So anyway, I'm looking on there. Or no, actually, I think it was actually a big time magazine. Anyway, they had an article about this guy, Bobby Fischer, and how next year he was going to be taking on the Soviets and he was expecting to beat these Russians. And so I'm reading that and I get my hair cut and I walk out of the barbershop thinking, yeah, that guy's pretty good. Like, probably he's like number one. And hey, I'm like probably number two.
Like, who,
Because
who are these guys?
pretty good. You can't just Google anything in those days. You don't know what you don't know.
Right.
And so, but about 5 or 6 months later, my sister, someone had written into the Houston newspaper, the Chronicle, I think it was, and we got a question. We saw Captain Kirk and Spock playing this 3D chess thing, on Star Trek, and we were wondering what the rules are. And fortunately, the guy on the case, responds, frankly, we have no idea what the rules are. But if you go to the Houston Chess Club at 4714 Fannin Street, I'm sure there's someone there who will be able to help you. And so my sister, being very proud of her little brother, clips it out and says, hey, Dad, you should take Ron down to the chess club. Oh, man. So that was like January 1972. First step in the door. And first guy I play is like a 2100 player who, is already a pretty good player. Right?
Yeah.
A guy who for his life had aspired to, become a master. And he
Hmm.
got up about as high as 2150. And then I think he finally barely made 2200.
Hmm.
And of course, keep in mind, in those days, ratings moved a lot slower. Like you
Right.
got a rating list at the chess club every 3 months or something. And when the rating list arrived, all the best players got to look first to see what their new rating was.
Yeah.
And then you got to look last. And so anyway, so I play him and I'm white. I sacrifice a piece. I get couple of pawns and a check. And if he goes the wrong way with the king, I will pick off the rook in the corner. Now, usually most of the people I played with, this was a pretty good deal. Okay.
Yeah.
This guy takes the piece, goes the right way with his king, and then proceeds to start methodically pushing me back and then beat me over the head with the extra piece. But, you know, the eternal confidence of youth, I'm like, shake it off. Let's play again.
Yep.
Then he killed me even worse the second game. And that was kind of when I gradually began to realize there might be a few more people between me and that Bobby Fischer guy than I realized. So
a couple more steps to go.
yeah, no. Then a few weeks later, I played my first tournament. You know, that was January, and we were very lucky at that time. We had a lady, Lynn Babcock. Her son had played, you know, was playing, and he actually got to the rank of master, and then he eventually went off to Sweden and actually became a top-notch table tennis coach. You know, and so. And then years later, he came back to New York, and you know, we reconnected and so forth. And he even spent some time working with me down on the floor of the stock exchange. And today he does programming for like one of the big hedge funds there in New York, money management companies. And he actually helped me with a lot of my whole technology summer upgrade this summer because he's very in tune with all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so anyway, but his mom for a couple of key formative years actually bought the Houston Chess Club from an Argentine doctor who sold it to her. It was a 2-story facility. Now we're talking 1970s in Houston, okay? And very rare to have a chess club in such a place, you know? So I was just very fortunate. And so over the next couple of years, I hung out with a lot of older players that were like 2,100 players, you know, FedEx workers, NASA programmer. You know, one guy was studying for his PhD in psychology at Rice University. You know, high-level intellectual people for, you know, a 15-year-old uneducated kid to be hanging out with. But we all had chess in common. We would play other board games from time to time, but we would always come back to chess. During that period, we played Acquire. We played Risk, we played Diplomacy, you know, various card games like Bullshit or whatever, you know, but we would always come back, you know, to chess, okay?
Yep.
And so I was very fortunate that I had a very good group of people, you know, that were kind of mentors. And eventually, of course, I surpassed them all in chess. But for a couple of key formative years, I was really fortunate to be surrounded by that kind of atmosphere, you know, and so forth. So that was kind of, and then from the moment I walked in the door of the chess club, January of 1972, I actually got my USCF master certificate November 11th, 1974. So that's about as fast as anyone ever went. And in those days, Matthew, there was no computer, there was no chess base. You got a book of Al Yetkin's games, and you just started, and you worked 10, 11 hours a day with a chess set and a board, you know. And so fortunately, I had a couple of years where I had the environment where I was able to do that. And that was how I got better. That was how I learned middle games. I suffered greatly in the openings because a couple of masters had passed through Texas. Kenneth Frey, international master from Mexico. And then later in 74, we had a Houston international, Robert Hubner, Edmar Mednes, Craig Chelstorp, Andrew Carklands, a number of different players. And so I was able to take a couple of long walks with Hubner, you know, which, you know, for a developing young player was like, you know, great. Yeah. I mean, Hubner, like massive intellectual, like this is a guy who transcribed Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay. That's the level of, you know, aside from being chess. In fact, they referred to him as probably the best amateur chess player in the world during that period, you know. And so, so anyway, during these walks, he told me that the way Fischer studied chess was he went back in history at the beginning of history and, you know, worked his way forward chronologically playing through the games of all the world champions. And so that was what I. Now, the result was that I suffered greatly in the opening and got horrible positions and then had to try and defend like Steinitz with all my stuff on the back rank, you know. I learned to fight like a dog, and I learned to play long games, and I learned to play in games, you know, a bit. And so, and I learned pretty decent technique, you know. Yeah. So it wasn't the worst, you know. Then later, I'd run into players that would memorize 22 moves of Sicilian Night-Or theory or whatever, you know. So that was kind of how I made that breakout from just like a class player, you know, to the rank of master. I started with Paul Morphy. There's a book on Morphy. Now today, I would not say you need to go through, like for example, Harry Nelson Pillsbury. There's a book by Sargent, 238 games. You don't need to go through 238 games of Pillsbury. Okay. I think if you go through his 10 to 15 best games, bam, I think you've kind of encapsulated what was his very best, you know. I think Marshall, there's a book of his 50 games. Yeah, you could go through that. Al Yekin's 3 volumes that he did. But now, of course, a lot of these books have since been updated, cleaned up, more modern algebraic notation, nicer versions, and so forth. And yes, I worked my way, not just the world champions, but a lot of the other players, and just worked my way chronologically forward, and then got to the hypermodern group and the Russians. And of course, Botvinnik made a very deep impression on me, as did Capablanca. And I know Kasparov was very enamored of Al Yekin, but a number of Al Yekin's attacks were borderline dubious.
Okay. Normally I hear that about Tao.
No, very imaginative, yeah. Whereas players like Botvinnik and Capablanca tended to play much more, precise, quote, correct chess, And so, and then Petrosian made a very deep impression on me, as, I'll describe later when we look at one of the games.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Fischer. Now, the problem with studying Fischer, then everyone wants to play like Fischer. So then I'd go to New York and I'd play the Najdorf, and all these masters like Gilden and Shamkovich and all these guys that had systems waiting for him would nail Ron instead of nailing Fischer.
Gotcha.
So I lost a number of bad games to strong players in but the thing too that I didn't understand at that time, Matthew, is that again, certain players, later as you get older, you gain more wisdom. Against certain players, you need to have a different style, a different approach. You don't have to take the battle to them. You can build a wall and let them come to you. And so instead of playing a Najdorf, maybe you play a Cairo Khan, and let them, they'll do the hard work for you. Then, like in martial arts, you just have to repel their energy and then use it against them.
Wow,
but I learned this lesson. So one year, second year around, I think I played Ljubojevic in Indonesia. So I had black against him. And so what I did was I played to Petrov and played a variation where I got the queens off and made it very dull. And my view is it was like just defanging the serpent, Because Lubo, of course, was, tremendously imaginative attacking player, And so, but of course, when you're young, you just think, oh, this is my opening. I'm going to play the Najdorf Sicilian against everybody, right? Just like Bobby, just like Kasparov, right?
So even back then, they all had a trend in opening theory or what they want to play. Like right now, I think it's the London system is like a big one.
Yeah.
So something like that.
Which, not to do a plug, but I did do a 22-hour course on the London system.
Hey, there you go.
You actually have I think I just told me this week that they are now editing London system versus Queen's Indian attack. Versus Queen's Indian. And, but actually the London system is interesting because there's a number of different interpretations. And to be honest, when I saw Kamsky come back, after he had that period where he retired, if you look at his games in the 90s, he would play these super sharp Moran Slavs, like we're going to see in one of the games that we're going to look at today.
Okay.
And he won some beautiful, amazing games, like against Kramnik with white and so forth, super sharp stuff. Then he comes back, and after this sabbatical, for a law career or whatever, and now he's playing the London. And at first, I just thought, oh, he doesn't want to do the work to keep up with contemporary theory. But then over time, as I start to see more and more games, and I also went to a lecture at the Las Vegas Chess Festival that he had, and I realized that certain players have a certain talent for certain openings, okay? Like when I was a kid, if you wanted to play the French defense, you had to know the games of Wolfgang Ullmann, East German Grandmaster 2550. And Kamsky has a certain talent for it, but he also works at it. And in the London, like Magnus, he's also developed his own theory in certain lines, okay? And certain positions that are considered harmless or something, he's found some nuance, that makes it a bit dangerous, So then I had deeper appreciation and realized that it wasn't by accident that he was just winning game after game after game, and he wasn't just avoiding, Botvinnik Slav theory and so forth.
Right.
He, kind of developed his own system, Now, of course, Kramnik, Magnus Carlsen, a couple of these other streamers, Eric Rosen, a lot of these guys have kind of jumped on the London bandwagon. Now, of course, the new flavor is the Jobava.
Yes, knight C3.
Yes.
The early one.
To be truthful, one of my students that I'd turned on to the London, Eric Rosen says play knight c3 and play the Jobava. And I'm like, oh no, I don't believe in these openings where you're blocking the c pawn, you're blocking your knight, from the c pawn and so forth, But then I realized the Jobava does have, there's a trade-offs, as always in chess, there's trade-offs.
Right.
If you put the knight on c3, yes, you do block your c pawn. And you do have possibilities that they may come pin you. But on the other hand, you have more quick strike possibilities with knight to b5 or slamming in e4 at the right moment.
Right.
So there's always those trade-offs. I've found against lower rated players that the Jobava is a real killer because X number of them just simply overlook knight b5 at a bad moment.
Yeah.
And then they immediately collapse on c7,
Mm-hmm.
Of course, when you play the more advanced players, they play e6, then they play a6 at some moment. Knight b5 is off the table, but then on the other hand, they spin a move to play a6, Yeah. And so yeah, there's always trade-offs. And then also too, if you compare the Jobava to the regular London, a lot of times the last piece, the hardest piece to find activity for is that knight, goes to d2. Now in the Carlsbad variation, and like we'll see in the Queen's Indian, there's some cases where the knight goes to d2 and then up to c4. This is like, say, black has a pawn on e6, d6, b6, that kind of thing. Yeah. Knight goes to c4, and then it arrives at e3, which is a tremendous square, surprisingly enough, because from there it can support c4, d5. It has possibilities on e5, can go to g4, swing over that way. So that kind of rotation, Again, those are things that I'm a big believer when you study an opening and looking at complete games, as opposed to just move 12, plus over equal, white's 0.60 better according to Fritz, great, I'm going to play this. But when you look at the games of the past greats, players like Bronstein, he had a fantastic game in the London, I think, playing this type of maneuver and bringing the knight to e3. And I think that was one of the first games where I saw the power of bringing this knight. Also, when you listen to someone like Magnus Carlsen talk, it's pretty clear that he knows and appreciates chess history,
Yes.
And so it comes up like in his commentary, if you ever watch him do Banner Blitz, which I have to say him and Hikaru were probably the two role models for my own show, that I set up. Watching them, seeing what they did, how they interact, and so forth, learned a lot from them. So
right.
Anyway, I wandered off topic. I forgot where we...
No, it's great. I mean, that's part of the interview process here. You know, just have fun, be yourself. And no, I found that interesting too about the Jobava. Just to touch on that real quick, I was curious about it I'm a London player. I checked out Alexander Bortnick's games, and he played the Jobava a lot, but mostly against people who are at least 200 points lower rated than him. So I guess, as you said, it's definitely a type of opening to play against lower rated opponents. Because I tried doing it against opponents about my rating or higher. It doesn't quite work.
Well, the problem I found, I feel like have less control with than the regular London. The regular London, you got the pawn pyramid. That center is a tough nut to crack. Okay. Whereas with the Jobava, you get some of these positions with kind of disoriented pawn structures that you're kind of relying on your initiative. And yeah, against weaker players, yeah, but against strong players that play strong positionally, I have some questions about the Jobava, but it is different, and it does offer some quick strike possibilities. So
okay. All right, well, this isn't supposed to be intended as a lesson, so let's go ahead and jump right into the next question here, which is, did you have any formal coaching in chess? And I guess that could be for one of the games later. This is for the viewers, obviously.
No, I'm trying to think. I never really was fortunate to have, quote, formal coaching. Now, I was fortunate that, like I mentioned, there was that cluster of, like 2,100 players. And give you an idea, like, so I walked into the chess club, and before that first tournament, this guy, Larry Engelbretson, who was like, 2150, kind of a jack of all trades, master of none, as they say, good at bridge, good at this, good at that, but never really became a superstar at any of the above. And so he eventually became manager of the chess club. And so he would get out of Rice University about 4, I'd get out of school across town, and then he'd go to the chess club, open it up, and then the club didn't officially open until 7 o'clock. Well, once I caught on to this, I would immediately come home, throw my school books on the table, run down, catch the bus, and take the bus across town, and I'd be waiting on the doorstep. And then eventually Larry'd come, kind of big, heavy set, jolly guy, come rolling around the corner. And imagine, Matthew, my first rating was 1465. I had this 2100 player all to myself for like 2 or 3 hours. And we play 5 minutes. So anyway, that first week, about a week before the first tournament called the New Year's Open, or something in
Right.
January of 1972, we're down at the Jack in the Box. So, the previous games with this Mr. Brieger, my first guy in the door, notwithstanding, having dinner there with Larry, and I'm like, so got the big tournament this weekend. He's like, yeah, and I'm like, so Larry, what do you think my chances are? He's trying to let me down gently. Well, Ron, there's going to be a lot of players, yeah, Bill, what do you think my chances are? Now, in those days, like you pay a $10 or $15 entry fee, and first prize might be like 250 or 300, right? And Larry doing his best to let the kid down, a little. Well, John Dunning, he's a master. He's going to be coming in from San Antonio. He's pretty good at these things. Oh yeah, but so anyway, so I played my first tournament. In those days, Matthew, time control was something like 40 moves in 2.5 hours. 16 moves in one. My first game in, I'm playing a 1900 player. Alan Laverty.
Now, was this one only USCF or was it FIDE as well?
No, but dude, this is 1972.
Okay.
FIDE was barely a blip,
Okay, gotcha.
FIDE, it could barely handle the World Championship, let alone a weekend Swiss in Houston,
Gotcha.
Rating systems had not been computerized yet, this is like definitely USCF,
Okay.
So my first game, so I play the whole game in 5 minutes, and of course this 1900 player crushes me, and he's trying to be real nice, like maybe you should slow down a little, take the time. I'm like, yeah, but look, I only use 5 minutes. He's like, yeah, but maybe if you slow down and think a little. Anyway, from there, I lost to some more 1800 players. Finally, in the last round, I play the other junior in the tournament, Greg Pease, and I beat him. And I walk out thinking I'm good. I scored 1 out of 5 in my first tournament. But the next tournament, a month later, I scored 1.5. Then I scored 2. Then I scored something like 2.5. And then somewhere about 4 months in, or maybe a year later, I don't know. I got like playing in the Texas Junior. Now I'm probably up to 1545 or 1600 or something. Playing the last round. I've got like 2 points. And I'm playing this guy, Michael Moore or something from San Antonio. And again, like I said, no theory. So I play E5. And at some point, this guy's got, I'm black in a Sicilian, he's got knight sunk in on D5 and B5. Position's so bad, it's like one of those you want to crawl under the table, okay? Yeah. And disappear. Anyway, I managed to survive. I get to a queen and rook endgame. I'm a pawn down. He takes the pawn on D6 or something, bangs it on the table, and says, what are you going to do now? Why don't you resign? What are you going to do now? And this guy drove over with a bunch of his buddies from San Antonio. So you're talking a 4.5 hour drive, right? And he's like, what are you going to do? Like queen takes pawn check or rook to the 8th check? And I'm like all depressed. I think he, like, say my queen is on C7 and he's got a pawns on F2, G2, H3, and a king on G1. He's got his rook on C1 or something. And he just played queen takes on C6, supported by the rook on C1. I got a rook somewhere on the D file. And then the guy proceeds to tell me, so what are you going to do? Play queen takes pawn check or rook to the 8th check? Or wait, why don't you just resign? And then he gets up and starts chatting with his buddies. Me, I'm sitting there, I'm all depressed. Before I was 1 pawn down, now I'm 2 pawns down. But then I start looking. Well, of course, queen takes pawn check is stupid. I don't know if his pawn was on H3 or H2. But then I start looking at this rook to D1 check. And I'm like, wait a minute. He can go king to H2 because my queen covers that. And if he moves his king, I'll take his rook, protect my queen. And then I start looking at it. And I'd never seen this tactic before. Now, of course, I know it's called hook and ladder or something like that, Yeah. But anyway, so I'm looking at it. Finally, he comes back to the board. I play the move. The guy turned maple circle in the face. He was so furious. And believe me, that ride was not 4 hours back to San Antonio. It was more like 7. Kicking himself all the way. So I wound up scoring something like 3 or 3.5 points, which was phenomenal, for my rating. But I never in my life had an opponent besides that guy tell me the winning move, because I didn't know to look for it. I'd never seen the tactic, but anyway. So, I studied a lot. I played all the time during that period. Oh, but what I was going to tell you about Engelbretson. So the first 6 months. So from January to June,
Okay.
5 days, I go to the chess club. After a few days, after a week or so, I realized he liked jelly donuts. God bless, there was a Shipley donut on the corner where the bus stop was that I had to catch. So I'd get him a still donut, I'd get me a brownie. Okay, that was my tuition. Then I'd take the bus across town. Larry'd come, and he'd play me for 2 or 3 hours. First person walked in the chess club at 7:05, Jack Cook or someone. Ron, that's okay, Larry. I'll see you tomorrow. Matthew, this went on until June. Larry won every single game. I mean, I did not even make a draw. Okay. He beat me every single game, but I kept coming back, right?
Yeah.
On the job learning. Finally, somewhere around June, hot day, no school, there early, just me and Larry playing in the club, nice AC, and it was nice sets, tables, beautifully done. In walks Steve Moffett. Steve was a NASA programmer on the early Apollo missions. We're talking when a laptop like you got there took up a room. We're talking like under the board, they had air conditioning, ducts and big rubber matting, 1960s, okay? And anyway, so, smart programmer. Steve is an amazing guy, PhD, but he was one of the guys that could actually talk to you on whatever your level was. So you didn't feel like he was talking over your head. You could not. Great guy. He was a master. He'd won Texas State Championship one year. Anyway, Steve walks in. This is in June. We're talking 6 months later. And he looks at the position. Larry overreached a bit with black, took a few too many dubious chances. Now I'm crushing him in the center. I mean, like crushing him, like steamroller coming down the center. Okay.
Yeah.
Like I can't even screw it up if I wanted to. Okay. And Moffett looks at it. Then he says to Larry, kid's getting pretty good, isn't he? And Larry just like mumbled. I actually felt bad for Larry because, I mean, he'd won every game for 6 months. Anyway, I went ahead and won the game though, but I did feel bad for him, But here's one point though, Matthew, is kids today don't have that kind of perseverance. Like I work with a lot of kids and they just want to play people that are easy that they can beat, and whereas back in that day, you sought out the competition.
Yes.
So one thing I would offer to a lot of the kids looking to improve, unless it's like a state title or a national title in these scholastic tournaments, play in the best section you can. Play the best players. That's how you're going to get better. Don't worry about your ego. In 3 years, 5 years from now, when you're 500, 1,000 points higher, who's going to care, that you won an extra point or two in a much weaker section,
Now that brings up an interesting point, and I'm curious of your answer to this. What about the idea that putting them into the top section where they're going to get mauled might actually hurt their confidence and they don't want to play again?
Well, that's the question, is if they have the psychological strength to withstand it and not worry about it, then they should play the strongest section they can.
Gotcha.
If they're psychologically fragile, then let them build up their gradual momentum and get better and better gradually. But one thing that I noticed about the Russians in my years in New York, like later, after I was already a master and there were a bunch of us striving to become grandmasters, guys like Sergei Kudrin, Dmitry Gurevich, they were very close, during years when I was living in Brooklyn. And to them, it was all about getting better at chess, And like I remember one time, it really impressed me with Dmitry. I'd had a really good result in Lone Pine one year where I scored 6 out of 9, which just like barely missed the GM norm. And last round, I think I'd beaten Yehuda Grunfeld. I'd lost a game to Bent Larson. And the game with Ferentos that we're going to look at later might even be from that tournament. I don't remember if it was that exact year. But later I saw Gurevich at a tournament in Hastings, and after we played our game, we're talking, and he said, "By the way, in Lone Pine, last year, I really liked your game with Robbie Solman," and that really impressed me, because the game with Robbie Solman, he was the least famous, lowest rated of all the players I played, because Lone Pine was ridiculously stacked. He was like 2350 player, but with black. I played a very delicate line in the Peerts or Modern, where I'd sack the exchange and the tempo constantly hung by a balance and then by a thread, and then finally, transferred into a winning in game and so forth. And the fact that he would pick that game of all my games from that tournament, where I'd played much more famous players, and grandmasters, and the fact that he zeroed in on that game really showed me that he had an appreciation for good chess. It wasn't about titles, it wasn't about rating points, but it was about, the quality of the chess. Forget who plays it, but the quality of the chess. That really, made, in fact, I think I even beat Kudrin in that tournament. But the game he was impressed with was the game where I played the much lower rated player,
Interesting.
And so that's the point, is too many people focus on trophies and rating and all this, but the truth of the matter is, you just become as strong as you can become, and all those other things, they're going to fall into place that when the time comes,
Right.
So,
The hardest worker.
mm-hmm. But anyway, what else are we supposed to cover?
Oh, let's see. Question number 3. No, that's too black and white. Career aspirations were past tense. Just kidding.
Well, they do change over time.
But obviously, you being also a coach down in Fort Lauderdale, I believe. Actually, you ran your own club down there, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, for a very brief time, but now I'm the full-time chess program director at a very nice school, Miami Country Day School. Maybe you can pull it up on a website.
Yeah.
It's an absolutely beautiful campus. Miami Country Day School, North Miami, like northeast 108th Street. Going back there to a minute of changing aspirations, there's back in the day, I remember there was a Jewish comedian girl, and she's like, yeah, when I got out of college, I had aspirations of meeting the perfect guy, tall, dark, handsome, rich, considerate. Now I'm just down to warm and breathing,
Oh, man.
So yeah, our goals and aspirations can change over time,
Now, actually, back in that time too, I believe the First Move program they were trying to implement that starting in Sunrise. Were you a part of that at all?
Well, actually, that's another story. Oscar Maldonado, who recently passed away, did a lot of work here in the Broward area, and he'd taken me out to meet the mayor, Mike Ryan, and a nice picture, and we did some nice things. But then eventually, Sunil and Hikaru came in, and I got pretty busy with the Miami Country Day position, which eventually started out doing summer camps, but then eventually became a full-time position where we actually have chess as a middle school elective, where the kids take it, they get credit for it, the same as music, math, music, dance, anything like that. And I believe that's really where chess belongs.
Yeah.
To be honest, chess will never, well, we say never, but times do change, and the internet has changed things. But it'll never be a spectator sport in terms of filling up a 70,000 seat stadium.
Right.
But where it does belong is in the schools as an educational tool, because education in this country is a serious problem, okay? And getting kids to focus, especially in this day and age of video games and instant gratification, is a real challenge. And so more and more schools are recognizing that. I think Broward a few years ago approved it for over 200 schools. Franklin Township has it in their 2 schools, although there, I think maybe it's required for like 2nd and 3rd graders. And I don't totally agree with that approach. To me, it should be an elective where if they want to take it, they take it. And if they like it, they run with it and so forth. But at my school, fortunately, they're very forward looking. And about 4 or 5 years ago, they decided to offer it as an elective. And every year we have 10 or 12 kids. Actually, we usually have more sign up. But because of certain requisite requirements that they need to have, for their college, sometimes they're not able to fit it in, according to the schedule.
Yeah.
And then we also have after school clubs for the kids, for the lower school kids. And then once a year, we have an extern program, which basically for 1 week, instead of normal classes, the kids do something else. And so that we've had as many as 40, 45 kids sign up, for chess.
Wow.
And they do 1 week of chess that usually ends with like a blitz tournament on Friday. Maybe it'll have a simul. Now that's pre-pandemic. This year they changed the thing. And then the other thing my school does pre-pandemic is we'd run about 5 or 6 nice top-notch tournaments. In fact, probably Mr. Hutzko.
I don't
Michael Hutzko. He's like a USCF. I think he's a regional director, tournament director. And so he was actually the founder of our program. And way back as far as like 2000, early 2000s, he took some teams to national championships and Florida state championships. So our school actually has won something like 4 or 5 Florida state championships at different grade levels in chess. In fact, last year, pre-pandemic, we won the 5th grade, up in Orlando, got back to school, and then by Friday, school was closed. But the head of our university, very classy lady, God bless her. She came last year and bam, this is her first year on the job. But she's very supportive for chess. And so since we didn't get to do a formal trophy presentation to all these great kids that were on the team, she wrote a personal handwritten letter congratulating them for their accomplishments in chess and other things to each of the 4 students that was on the team. So
that's amazing.
So they're just fantastic. They're very supportive for the whole chess program. And we're looking forward next year to, getting back on track, with tournaments and the whole regular schedule,
Yeah. Actually, that brings me to the final question before going to the games here. How has the pandemic affected the chess scene for you?
That is a great question and pretty obvious for these times. But like anything, pluses and minuses. When the pandemic first hit, a lot of my private students that I would visit them in their homes suddenly stopped, which is understandable. However, they were replaced by a whole new wave of online students. Okay. And then as things started to kind of cool off and it looked like we were going to get around the pandemic, bam, Queen's Gambit hits.
Yep.
And that was like another adrenaline shot of, people calling up wanting online lessons. So basically, but as far as the school itself, what's happened there is we had summer camps last summer. And chess was actually the only one made it all the way through the summer, which, is a shame. I mean, like our basketball program for girls basketball, we got an amazing coach, Coach Okiel Swaby, fantastic guy, has won something like 13 regionals, 8 states, 2 national titles for girls basketball.
Wow.
He tried to run a summer camp and he had 2 brothers registered because, physical sports just simply don't translate online. However, chess did. And so we ran chess. We'd do an hour each morning, beginner, intermediate, advanced. Okay. And we wound up running the whole summer. Now this year, what our school is doing is we're going to go ahead and have all the physical sports, swimming, soccer, and everything on campus. But for chess, we're going to go one more summer of having it online. And then hopefully by September, then we can get back to regular after school clubs, in person, having tournaments, our usual 5 or 6 tournaments and so forth. But here's the challenge with chess, Matthew.
That's fine. This actually is, people mess it up all the time.
I'm sorry.
That's fine.
No, but seriously, Matthew. So the challenge with chess, like we ran nice tournaments. Okay. We'd set out 50, 60 chess sets. We had like an art gallery where we'd set, a Skittles table. And then we'd also have some concessions. But can you imagine during these pandemic times trying to clean 50 or 60 sets in between every round? Just a logistical nightmare.
Yep.
So basically, as the director of the chess program, I made the decision with full support of the school that the sets don't come out until we are past this. Okay.
Okay.
Because and fortunately, we're fortunate that the chess does translate online. So like I'm still doing I do my middle school class in person. Okay. About 12 kids this year. And I do the after school clubs online. Okay. And so that's kind of what's happened is fortunately for chess, it does translate well online. So there has been some transition there. But I think by September next year, I think we should be back to normal swing of things, hopefully.
Right. And by the end of the stream, we'll talk a little bit more about current over-the-board tournaments, or I guess over-the-board tournaments that are about to come up. Anyway, yes, to Merjan in the chat, can you teach me chess? Well, that's actually what we're going to be doing today.
Hopefully.
Yep. So let's go ahead and get started. Thank you very much for the excellent intro there. I've got to learn a lot about you and what's been going on in the chess scene here in Florida. So let me go ahead and switch on over to the main board. Bam. All right, so the first game we have here is you on the black end versus Victor Gyoza.
Well, Gyozo Forentos. And, you know, I have to say, another trap that I fell into when I was a young, improving player, you know, like even when I was 2350, 2400 moving up, is I was too overwhelmingly impressed if I'd seen some guy's name in print. I was like, oh. So I think Forentos had done a book on the Petrov defense, you know, with some other guy, you know. And so now the story with this, do you have a copy of the picture of the Petrosian book of games?
Yes, let me go ahead and pull that up real quick.
So this game took place in Lone Pine, California. Okay. Lone Pine is like, if you're going from San Francisco to Las Vegas, I think it is. And it's one of those literally one red light towns. If you blink and pass through the light, you missed it. Okay. But in the early 70s, we were blessed to have some fantastic tournaments there. And the reason being is that this millionaire inventor, Louis D. Statham, lived in Lone Pine. And he actually built a very nice hall, a little auditorium, specifically for the chess tournament, which came once a year. And he would invite the best players he could, try to reach out to the Russians, get some good Russian players and some of the best players he could. And then they would invite some of the top talented, you know, young American players, and they would have various rating cutoffs. As the tournament got stronger and stronger, of course, the rating criteria went up. And so give you an idea, for example, some of the young players that played there during those years were guys like Yasser Seirawan, John Fedorowicz, Nick DeFermian, Christensen. You know, in fact, a lot of us would play basketball at the local gym. So anyway, Statham built this hall specifically for the chess tournament. I mean, like, you didn't even hear the doors when they closed. You know, at a normal cafeteria, your door closes, you hear the loud clang, clang. Yep. Oh no, these were like, you know, and then basically the town got to use it the rest of the year for their community town hall meetings, whatever. But once a year, you know, the chess tournament was the big thing, came to town. And so I don't remember if this was my first, second, or one year I caught a bus during my college years, would have been 76. It doesn't say here what year this was, but I think this was a little later. I actually caught a bus from Mobile, Alabama,
1976.
3 days, 3-day bus ride, horrible. I finished almost last, but I won one game, a queen and pawn in game against David Strauss, an international master, I think it was. Took about 80 or 90 moves, queen and knight pawn versus queen. But I was determined, man, I'm going to win this game. But this particular game, so this particular year, Petrosian was playing. He was one of the two Russians. Usually they would invite two Russians. It might have been Smyslov, might have been the other. Okay. So anyway,
interesting to hear those names from back when you were playing. That's really cool.
No, I mean, for me, it was like meeting legends. Like, I'd studied collections of these guys' games, and it was like to see them in person. It would be like you being a soccer player and meeting Pele or Diego Maradona or someone. Well, Diego Maradona sober, you know.
Got you.
Sorry, non-secreture there.
That's fine.
By the way, Diego Maradona plays chess. There's a picture of him playing chess. He actually quite likes chess, you know. There's a talk show in their country where he was actually on and met Karpov, and they played, you know, 5 or 6 moves and agreed to a draw or something, you know. But anyway, but I digress. Okay, so this particular year, Petrosian is there, and I think Smyslov. And so anyway, you know, at the tournament hall, like 10 in the morning, usually the games are like, say, 1 in the afternoon, they start. But about 10:30, they post the pairings, and you could go and check your pairing. And I happened to see Petrosian there. Well, I knew he was in the tournament, so I'm carrying around a copy of my book, Tigran Petrosian, by, what is it, Life and Games of Tigran Petrosian by Vic Vasiliev. Okay. Never heard of Vic Vasiliev before, since, or after. Okay. But anyway, I'd gone through the book, and I see Petrosian, and I go up to him, and I have the game turned to my favorite game, and I ask him if he'll autograph it. And so he looks at the diagram, and it's not coming back to him right away. And he flips back a few pages, and he sees, Spassky Petrosian World Championship match, 1966. I don't know, maybe game 14 or something. And then he goes back to the page I had it on, and then he autographs, "To Ron, good luck, Tigran Petrosian." Of course you can barely read it, But on the other hand, so that's 10:30 in the morning. So already this is like one of the best days of my life, right? Anyway, go back to the hotel, eat, shower, nap, whatever, and go start playing my game. I'm black against Giozo Ferentos. Okay, so let's see what happened. Giozo Ferentos, I think at that time maybe I'd only played. I drew my very first grandmaster was Arthur Bisgar in Mobile, Alabama, one year playing, and I was like 1900 at the time. And then I don't remember if I'd played any other grandmasters in between. Probably. So anyway, so in those days, I was a King's Indian defense kind of guy. And you can see white has, if my knight comes to c6, it would actually be an exact closed Sicilian reverse. Okay. So anyway, knight there. He's playing a very flexible pawn formation. Castles. And now I play old school knight bd7. Again, knight to c6, bishop to e6. That would be kind of standard textbook, English or closed Sicilian reverse, if you will. But now he plays d3. Not really sure why he didn't play d4. But of course, on d4, I'd play rook e8 and try to go for e4. And, fantasize about being a King's Indian attack player like Bobby Fischer, So now I play knight h5. I want to play pawn to f5. Okay, and that's what you do in the King's Indian. You get the pawn duo up there, and then you hope you can play f4 or e4 and try and generate some attack. Against players, it works. Against good players, they freeze your pawns and they crush you on the queen side. But hey, them's the breaks. Well, now, to my utter amazement, the guy plays pawn to g4. Well, not a lot of choice here, right, Matthew? Got to retreat the knight.
Come back.
Okay. It's too early to go Tal or Neshmedinov on him. And now he goes knight to g3. So you know what my thoughts were here, Matthew?
Not quite. I mean...
No, but psychologically. Here's my thought.
Okay.
I've never seen this g4, knight g3. But you know what I'm thinking? I'm thinking, wow, this must be like a known standard crush on the Grandmaster Tour. But all that notwithstanding, we still got to play our next move and find a plan, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, darn it, couldn't get in f5 that way. Let's go this way. I mean, that was really my thought. That's how much respect I had for these guys, because I'd seen his name in print because he'd done a book on the Petrov, I'm like, wow, this must be like a standard crush on the Grandmaster Tour. So now Christensen was great about that. He had no respect, no fear of anyone, Just thought he was God's gift to the game, and that was that, and they were lucky to be playing with him. If I'd have had that kind of confidence, who knows where I would have gone. Up 500, down 500, who knows?
Well, you hit GM, so you must have done something right.
Anyway, so he goes bishop d2. So he's not playing in super aggressive fashion, okay? So anyway, first I go knight c5. Well, that's pretty clear. We're touching the pawn. Let's see. You told me how to make arrows here or something. Let's see if I learned anything.
If you hold control and click, or just drag with
Control,
the right click the mouse.
Oh, right click. There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
All right.
Have you ever thought about being a chess teacher? Elite chess teacher.
Sometimes.
Okay, so you can see the pawn on d3 is under attack. So queen e2, he's, making his development and so forth. And now I go queen h4. I mean, look, I don't know much, but I know he does not have a knight to come to f3, and I know his pawn on g4 is under attack. It might be a standard Grandmaster crush, but hey, I am attacking his pawn. Now he plays f3, which that's kind of an ugly move. If anything, I was really expecting h3, okay? But then I could target it with like h5 or f5 if I want.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, he played f3. That kind of surprised me. Well, it may be a standard Grandmaster crush, but I know I need to anchor my knight on c5. That's like King's Indian Defense 101, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So now he goes bishop e1, and now I see the point of f3. Okay, so time to beat a retreat. I play queen back. And now, if he goes knight in to d5, I'll just go queen back to d8 and give it the boot. Okay?
Yeah.
So he goes king in the corner, but now I take away knight d5.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, it's a game. His pawns all on the third rank make a little bit of a weird impression, but now, by the way, do you have a chess program giving an evaluation anywhere along here?
I've
never looked at these games. Keep in mind, ChessBase, didn't really gain utility until like the late 80s, early 90s. So I've never actually really looked at most of these games under the microscope of a Fritz / Stockfish / Houdini or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, he goes rook over. I go f5. Mission accomplished. Okay. So he takes, take. Now he goes knight h4, going after my bishop. Okay, so save the bishop. He goes f4, freezing my pawn.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Grandmaster Lombardi, the late, great William Lombardi, tremendous talent, fantastic understanding of domination and so forth. He told me once, your opponent has a good piece in your territory. You got to get rid of it. If it means sacrificing exchange to chop it off, whatever you do, you can't just let it camp out. You got to get rid of it.
Right.
So if I trade a knight on the back rank for his only guy that's in my territory, that's probably not bad. So he goes bishop g3. By the way, Matthew,
Yes.
Very important point in chess. It's amazing, absolutely amazing how far you can get in chess by simply taking what they give you, I know that sounds obvious, but it's so true, Like opponent wants to zip out and give you the bishop pair. Okay. Now king off, vacate the g file. Okay. Now he goes rook over.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm still not a bit clear. There's a lot of tension, potential tension in the center. He's got a lot of pawn breaks, but I figure he goes rook over. Bam. Let's go e4 and jam him up. Okay. Now, do you have a Stockfish or a computer here? Does it give any evaluation here?
Yeah, evaluation. I turn it on for the viewers so that they can see the bar. Currently, it is at plus 0.2 at depth 23.
0.2. So it's very close to equal, right?
Yeah, exactly. Uh-huh.
Okay, that makes sense. And did it like to move e4? I thought e4 was excellent.
E4 or A4, both are equal.
Is the best move?
A4 or E4, yeah.
Oh, okay. A4 makes sense too. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, A4 might loosen up this knight sometimes. That's typical play. Okay. So anyway, now he takes. Now, again, trade-offs, pluses and minuses. He does have a connected passed f-pawn, right? And I do have a, quote, potential weak d6 pawn. But again, which brings to mind why he didn't play f5 here. Oh, I guess I would play the same as in the game, knight to d3 or bishop e5.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole crux of the King's Indian, and if you want to play the King's Indian defense with black, required must reading is Zurich 1953. That was kind of the coming out party for the King's Indian. And two classic games in that, you have to see Averbach white against Kotov, although they got to an old Indian, but they got this kind of position where black had the weak pawn on d6 because black repositioned his bishop from e7 to g7. And you absolutely have to see the game Reshevsky versus Bronstein, which this pawn structure with the pawn on d6, again, they're static versus dynamic. So the backward pawn on a half open file is a static type of weakness. But the offset is that black has dynamic counterplay. The knight on c5 potentially can go to d3. The bishop on g4, he's got activity. He's got an open line for the bishop. So that game, Reshevsky, Bronstein, Zurich 1953. And by the way, this is not just my opinion. Grandmaster Julian Hodgson, fantastic talent from England, was the guy who put the trompe on the map, in fact. But he played through that Zurich 53 tournament book like it was a Bible, you know. I mean, that would be like one of the 10 island chess books. If you had to go to an island, what are the books you take? Well, of course, Fischer's 800 and however many games, you know, the later version, okay? You take Kasparian's domination in 2,400 and 545 in games, and you take Zurich 53 maybe, and then you go from there, okay?
I'm going to write all these down.
But anyway, I'm sure everyone wrote that down religiously. Okay. But let's see. So I'm saying if you had to go to an island where there's no internet.
Yes.
Okay. All you got is your wooden chess pieces that you've now carved meticulously. You know, okay. And so anyway, but in Zurich 53, in the 50s, the Russians, guys like Boleslavsky, showed that the pawn on d6, even though it's potentially weak and a target, but it also offers chances for dynamic counterplay. And it's a question of dynamics versus static. So on the downside, the bishop on g3 does not impress, okay? Another thing that you can do, Matthew, that is extremely helpful is do what I call a relative value comparison, okay? You compare your pieces to theirs, like to like, okay?
Right.
So the black bishop on g7 is fantastic. You know, he's raking up and down this diagonal, okay? I didn't even draw that arrow. The bishop felt so good, he just fired it out there himself. Let's see that again. Okay. Yeah,
I'm drawing arrows for you.
Okay. What else? The knight on c5 clearly has much better potential than his counterpart on c3, okay? You can see that knight's just waiting to lurch in there, okay? And so one way you can evaluate a position is to look at your pieces, look at his pieces, and just compare like to like, okay?
Yeah.
Very simple thing, but amazing. And sometimes that'll give you a clue. Wow, his bishop's really dominating. Well, we got to get rid of that guy, okay? Okay, so anyway, is it okay if we go over? I'm sure we're over time.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. I mean, it's your time, so thank you very much.
You just put it in 3 or 4 segments, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so anyway, so he goes queen, and there you see, case in point. He's got the battery here. He's looking to come down and exploit my weak pawn.
Right.
Well, no time to be shy, duck in. Now here, he might do well to just consider sacrificing the exchange. Some kind of knight takes e4, bishop takes e4, something like that maybe. Although bishop takes e4 is a bit tricky. Bishop takes c3, but then he can play queen takes d3. Okay. And bishop takes e4, I could probably play knight takes the rook first. And then, oh, I can't do bishop c3. He's got queen c3 check. So I don't have time to play queen takes e4. Anyway, though, he could seriously consider some kind of capture on e4, sack the exchange. Yeah, game goes on. Okay. In the game, he played rook f1. Well, now I play bishop f5, anchor banker. You know, that knight is in there. Okay.
Yeah.
So now he goes king g1.
Stop.
Yeah, obviously, if he tries to take, like on e4, I take, and he can't, and he takes, I take with check, so it doesn't have time to collect the knight on d3. Okay. So that explains king to g1. Okay. But now I play an excellent, very dynamic move. And this is like very keeping in spirit of the King's Indian.
Okay.
I play d5. And this is a temporary pawn sack to blast open the position. Now, of course, in 2020, you know, every Russian schoolboy would look at d5, right? Even some American schoolboys. Okay. It's a very thematic move in the Sicilian defense, for example. Okay. And so anyway, he takes, but if he doesn't take, I'm just going to put something on, I'm just going to protect that d5 pawn, connect the dots. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and then good luck getting rid of that knight on d3. You know? so he kind of has to take. Okay. But now counterattack, queen to c5. So we're attacking the knight. Okay. He goes knight back to c3. And then, bam, knight takes b2. And you can see we're exploiting the fragility of the knight, okay? Now, again, he could try sacking an exchange for knight takes e4, but it's probably not totally sufficient. And so he takes on b2. But here's the point. Of course, I can play bishop takes c3 and get the piece back. But first, the old swish and shock. Now, of course, we know that's an in-between move. That's a check, right?
Yep. Yep.
Squishing in between, shock for check, right? Okay, back in the corner, and then bam, queen takes. So now, either you trade queens or you take back the pawn on b7. So he takes back the pawn on b7. Okay, so in the words of the great author Jeremy Silman, let's reassess our chess, right? Remember we talked about value comparison, right?
Yes.
Well, let's look at this pawn on e4 versus the pawn on f4.
Okay.
They're both passed pawns, but one is firmly blockaded, okay? And the other, could be motoring right up the board.
Right.
Let's look at these bishops, okay? Let's look at this guy. Let's see, how did you say we do? If we want
Just
to make,
click.
oh, right click, okay? And then if we do control,
Change
we
color.
can see this guy.
Yep.
Well, this guy needs to find a job, right? Rather than protecting two of white's remaining three pawns, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so anyway, rook at a to b8. At this point, I no longer felt I'd fallen into the standard Grandmaster crush. I mean, my pieces were all active. He hadn't laid a glove on my king. I even have a passed pawn. I got an open file. Yeah, it's not so bad. Okay. So he goes queen away. Bam, 7th rank. Grandmaster crush or no, I know the 7th rank is good stuff for rooks. They love 7th rank, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm threatening to take his pawn, and then I'll have this guy. So he plays rook up. So I trade. And then bishop to g4. Show the rook a little love.
Mm-hmm.
Now, but that's actually only part of the point. The real apple of my eye, being a King's Indian defense player, is I want to go eliminate this guy and then start saying hello to his king. You can see if I snake that bishop into f3, trade that guy, hit him with a fat queen check, put a rook on the g file, this is
GG.
like, yeah, right. Exactly. This is how Fischer and Kasparov mated people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he surprised me yet again. He goes bishop d4. I'm like, how can he do this? He's just forcing me to trade. But I'm like, okay, take. And now we have a rook and bishop versus rook and bishop in game.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one other very cool study point that I would tell you here, okay? Remember I said I like to study whole games for openings. When I'm annotating games and I get to this point right here, I make a note. Rook plus bishop versus rook plus bishop in game.
From the opening that you played. Okay.
No. The opening, put like in the game header and everything.
Okay.
And but then even somewhere in the game header, I may even I'll make a note,
Mm-hmm.
maybe insert a diagram, and I put rook plus bishop versus rook plus bishop in game.
Okay.
And what that does is it makes a mental marker for you to wake up. We're in an in game now. We're not an opening. This is an in game. Okay.
Yeah.
And this is this type of in game. And if the young players get in the habit of doing this, it will dramatically improve their in game play. You get a lot of young players, queens come off the board, they lose interest in the game. But we see from Magnus Carlsen, everyone thinks of Magnus as a great attacking player, but truth is he's a great in-game player, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And over half the games he actually wins are in the in-game. If you go back to the 2013 World Championship, what was it, game 3 or 4? It was at the point where he was black, and they had a queen and rook versus queen and rook in-game. And he made, the queens came off, and then at one point, he gives Anand, the reigning world champion, 2 outside pass pawns on A and B or C and B files. And he had like double pawns on the king side, but he saw he could get in and then force the win with his F pawn, okay? And this is against the reigning world champion to give him 2 connected pass pawns.
Yeah.
Now, possibly Anand could have drawn it, but later I began to realize Anand's weakness probably is rook in games. It's been noted by some very high-level players.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, we're not talking basic rook innings. We're talking like, 3,000 level in games.
Right.
And so Magnus has exploited this more than once. But my point, though, is to highlight so that you become interested, that you become fascinated with, that this is like Ulf Anderson, the great Ulf Anderson. He'd show up to play you. He'd have his sweater. He'd have his mug for his tea or whatever, And then the queens would come off the board. Now the sweater comes off. He has a sip of his tea, and now he's down to business. Now it's a day at the office for him, and he'll sit there with you for 8 or 10 hours, whatever it takes. Wolf Anderson, before computers, won queen and 8 pawn versus queen twice in tournament games. Okay, twice he won that in game. I mean, I was proud that I won queen and 8 pawn. He won queen and 8 pawn twice before computers. Okay, so the in games, there's a lot of points to be harvested in games. At the scholastic level, every coach teaches their kid tactics and openings. And look, Matthew, my belief is you can get to 1700 if you just are good at tactics, you see all the 1 and 2 movers, and you have your openings down. You probably get to 1700. But if you want to make that push to master, you got to start learning pawn strategy, pawn structures, and somewhere along the way, you really have to learn in-game technique. Like, well, this is game. First Grandmaster. I'm not going to blow him off the board, with an attack. These guys defend themselves, But now we got to this end game. So.
In the meantime, I was trying to look up that game you were talking about.
Do what?
In the meantime, I was trying to look up the game between Carlsen and Anand. I was able to find it. And yeah, that's pretty incredible.
Game 3 or game 6? Game 5? Carlsen was black.
It was game 6. Yep.
Game 6? Okay. Pull up. Can you pull up like later when they get to this rook ending where Carlsen's penetrating, he's got his double pawns? I mean, it's amazing. It's like he could have just repeated moves and made a draw. Okay. But no, he goes in with his king, sacrifices a pawn, gets his king down. Finally, Anand has to give up his rook for the passed F pawn or something, And by the way, I think that game turned the tide in his favor or gave him like +2 or something. That was like critical game in the match.
Yeah. I mean, not in a million years would I ever think, let me give my opponent 2 connected passers. Oh my goodness.
Okay.
All right. Sorry. Go ahead.
So anyway, but this is a very useful technique. When I save my games in chess base and I get to a position like this, I make a note. Rook and knight versus rook and bishop. 2 bishop versus bishop in game. Okay. Because it frames it in my mind, and then later if I want to pull it up, that's another story. Okay. So what happened here? Well, passed pawns must be pushed. Push that puppy. Okay. He gets behind it. Push again. He kicks my bishop. Okay. Challenge time. What do we do here?
Well, it's a tactic, so pause your videos, guys, on YouTube if you want to take a moment to try to figure it out. And in Twitch, you got something in chat. Go for it. Obviously, you can move your bishop. That would be my thought. But I started looking at checks and captures.
Okay, checks and captures.
2 captures.
Damn, there's a capture.
There it is.
Okay, so it's a deflection rook sack. Obviously, if he takes the rook, you promote the pawn, right? But here's part 2. So he goes rook e8 check, bails out the rook. You step up with the king, but now if he takes the bishop, then you go rook f1 check.
Wow.
And see then, well, he obviously would have to move up. You win the rook. He takes your bishop, but then you have a pretty easy, you go rook to e2, and you probably pick up the a2 pawn, you see? For a pretty easy rook versus bishop win.
Yeah.
So he goes king g1, covering the f1 square. So now we chill with the bishop and tap his rook. Well, he goes rook back to e3. Rook obviously has to, keep an eye on, the little monster, right? Now we bring the king up. He goes a3. So now he's beginning to realize he runs out of moves. If the bishop, heads down this way, for example, or moves anywhere, then he gives up access to the f1 square, you see? So he can't move. He goes a3, okay? I go h6. I learned this kind of thing from Petrosian or Karpov, just those little Capablanca, just those little quiet moves where you run them out, okay? You run them out of moves. In fact, his rook almost has no move up and down the file, you see? So we saw if he moves his bishop, we go rook into f1. If he moves his king, we go rook to f1, okay? If he moves either pawn, he starts to put him on pre. And so basically, this is already zigzwang. See?
Wow. That's really
cool. Look, he can't move the rook to the side. You just queen. We got every square. See, this is like mini domination, We got every square on the file covered, okay? So I think it was maybe about this point or a few moves later. I think a few moves later. So he plays h4. What to do? Now I improve the bishop. Now he does have a square for his rook. Okay, now what does he do here? He pitches the pawn. I go king up. He goes rook up. I go king h4. And now it's kind of a zigzag all over again. We saw that he cannot move the bishop. I got all the squares covered. If he moves the bishop anywhere down this way, you know, we go in check. Now, how do I get rid of those arrows?
Just click on the board anywhere.
I'll just go back. Okay. And so, and again, if he moves the king, we go rook f1. And so about all he has left to move is the rook or the a pawn. So I think this is about the point. Petrosian comes up somewhere around here. I think right around here when I'm playing king g5 or something. And he starts to watch the game. And he looks at it. And then he begins to realize that white's in zigzag. And he sits back, you know, just leans back a little, has this little small, looks at me. And then he has this little small smile on his face like, ah, my student. You know, that was, Matthew, you can't imagine, like a former world champion, a legend, you know, someone you idolized growing up, you know, and sees you beat your first grandmaster. I mean, that was like one of the greatest moments of my chess career, you know, just, you know, for him to actually be there and see that, you know. And then, you know, I think right about here, Ferentos studied for a while. Petrosian was there. He was watching. And then after Ferentos resigned, you know, Petrosian left and so forth. But you can see in the final position, not much for white to do. He can move his rook somewhere. I'm just going to snip this guy. I'm going to push this guy. Eventually, I'll either go in with my king or I'll come back with my king. I'll push the pawn to h3. I'll overload his circuits. Okay.
Yeah.
And, or I can capture this guy, put my bishop back on g4, put the pawn on h5, and then I can probably send the rook over to try and collect this guy on the other side. You know, I could play rook back across. If rook e3, I could take it again, hit him with another deflection. So basically, he's going to be a second pawn down with no counterplay. Probably I would never release the zigzag position. I'd probably just zigzag, and then after I collect this guy, play h5, and then I'd probably just bring my king, you know, and come back across the board, and then I'd collect this guy on the other side. And then that would be the guy that would, you know, tilt his circuits. Okay. But
just make him suffer.
But yeah, that was a great memory. And Lone Pine continued, I think, up until around 78 or so. Eventually, Louis D. Statham passed away. But it provided in the 70s, in a time when Americans normally had to either travel possibly to New York for Bill Goichberg tournaments or to Europe to get international opportunities. Lone Pine provided a whole generation of young players fantastic opportunities to play top-notch competition, you know. And so, you know, it really helped develop players like myself. Sirwan had some fantastic performances. I know DeFermian, Fedorowicz, you know, all these guys, that whole generation, you know, Christensen, you know, got to play there. Okay, now, should we go to the next game?
Absolutely. I mean,
oh, did you show him the book? Did you show him the Petrosian book?
Yes, I showed him the Petrosian. Actually, I showed the wrong one at first, and I showed the correct one.
Oh, okay.
I showed like a volume series between 1 year to another year.
Oh, that's okay. Okay, so now the next game. So turn the clock forward, 1982-83. The year before, I'd been playing in a tournament in Manchester. And I may have even lost to Miles in that tournament. I lost to Miles somewhere in some tournament where, you know, as a kid in those days, I didn't have my systems worked out. And I also didn't have unified, organized openings. Today, most of my openings with black are based on G6. And then it's a question of which way we go from there, okay? Do we go sniper? Do we go Gingy Indian? Do we go accelerated dragon? My latest love, the Norwegian rat, baby, okay? which I got from Magnus Carlsen. Tell you the truth. Quick aside, I know I'm a little out of order here, but I'm watching Magnus Carlsen play Bannerblitz. And here's the thing. One of the things, like, for example, when I was at one of these Lone Pine tournaments, and I traveled with a bunch of players, like down to, you know, like LA or whatever, you know, before getting on a flight or whatever. Yeah. And so Polygaevsky, famous grandmaster, he'd been one of the Russians at Lone Pine that year. And he was giving a lecture at the Santa Monica Chess Club. And one of my buddies that I was staying with, hey, you want to go? I'm like, yeah, duh. And I was very impressed with how professional he was, like going over variations. In those days, we had the old demo board and so forth, but consummate professional. And myself, long after I was a grandmaster, I've always loved, like one year at the National Open, I saw Walter Brown, lecture. And he was showing like an open Ruy Lopez, which I've never really understood those positions so much for white. And he was explaining like some of the different weaknesses in the black pawn structure, which I'd never really, had a grasp of.
Yeah.
And I saw Kamsky do a fantastic lecture on the London, some game against some guy I never heard of, but it was very, very, very deep analysis. And so I've always loved to go see other grandmasters lecture. Like I learned so much about the Benko Gambit back in the 90s when I made a video with Lev Albert. And I was like, darn, I wish I'd known all this back when I kept losing to the Benko Gambit. This would have been a big help. But for example, in the Benko Gambit, white is a pawn up. Well, normally you're taught when you're ahead, not afraid to trade. You should trade. However, in the Benko Gambit, a lot of times this is a mistake because the end game actually a pawn down for black offers him better chances. Karpov and Albert both taught me, and there's a classic game that you got to see, Karpov against Gelfand from their Sangi Nagar match. And Gelfand played the Benko Gambit against him, and Karpov brought his queen out to g4 and attacked him on the king side. And it turns out that in the Benko Gambit, because all of black's pieces naturally flow to the queen side, white's chances actually lie on the king side, which is a little counterintuitive because a lot of times the players with white, I mean, yeah, there are some games where white wins by pushing his a pawn, ramming it up the board and so forth. I've won games like that. But in general, white does not want to trade queens. He wants to keep the queens on the board. In this game, Karpov-Gelfand is a fantastic example of that. Karpov covered it in one of his videos. Well, of course, this is a bit counterintuitive. And if you just play by normal principles and I'm a pawn ahead, I got to trade queens, and then they get all this pressure in the end game, okay? And so so I've always been a big fan of going to lectures. I've learned so much. Now, that said, Reshevsky was a great name, but I saw him do a lecture or a lesson or something at the Marshall Chess Club, and I was extremely unduly unimpressed, I must say. It's like someone's asking him about the French, and he's like, oh, you just play knight d2. It's a little better for white. That's it. That was like the height of his departing knowledge. Needless to say, I was not very impressed, okay? But a lot of the lectures that I've attended over the years by other grandmasters, like when I was at the Vegas and they had lectures, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, if I had time and I could attend a lecture by someone like Albert or Brown or some of these guys, man, I'm there, because it's just good. You learn to look at different things that you hadn't thought of, okay? And so anyway, now
the lectures are online.
So I was talking about 1982, and I'm playing in a tournament in Manchester, and I found out somehow I met some of the Indonesian players, and I'm in the skills room and going over some of their games with them and whatever, and I find out, oh, did you hear about this big tournament we're having? Like in February next year. I'm like, oh yeah, maybe it was like late '81. And I'm like, oh yeah, it's going to be a big tournament. It's going to be possible to make a grandmaster norm like in one tournament. And
wow.
In those days, you had to play in 3 tournaments. Tournaments generally tended to be 7 to 9 rounds, and you had to get 3 grandmaster norms and have like a 2,500 rating or something. And so I'm like, yeah. And so what happened was Madame Suerto, wife of the President Suerto, wanted to bring chess to the masses in Indonesia, which is great. And it makes sense because it's economical. I mean, they got wooden carvings all over the place. So it's very easy for them to have wooden chess sets and so forth. Not like golf or tennis, where they need expensive rackets and golf clubs and such.
Oh, yeah.
So they were going to have some of the best players, like 1 or 2 of the best players from each top chess country that they could. And then they were going to have a handful of 5 or 6 talented local players. Okay. And so like from Indonesia, they got Ardianza, was like first Indonesian grandmaster at that time, Indian grandmaster. Anand had not, yet arrived on the scene for another 15 years. And from England, they had Grandmaster Raymond Keane and Murray Chandler. the Soviets, they were on the outs with the Soviets that year, so there was no Soviet representation. But from Hungary, they had like Zoltán Ribli, who'd played in the candidates, semifinals or something. And who else did they have the first year? Actually, you have the cross table there the first year.
I'm going to throw it up.
The cross table?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Gennady Sasanko, one of the world's leading theoreticians at that time. Florin Gheorghiu, the best Romanian player. And then from the U.S., so what happened is I talking to these players, and I was like, I think I was like 2450 IM at the time or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, listen, when you go back, tell the organizers I will pay my own airfare if they invite me to the tournament.
Wow.
Talk about jumping the line, right?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so they went back, and that was the deal is I paid my own airfare. Now, I'm a broke kid. I got nothing, okay? But I think I found $1,500 somewhere, somehow, and I paid my airfare, and I got
Chess
the
players
invite.
could do it.
No, so the U.S. representatives was myself, Walter Brown, and Larry Christensen, okay? So, now the good news is they would publish every couple of weeks who the players were going to be. So the good news was I got to find out who all the European players, all the top players were going to be, okay? And they knew almost nothing about me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd look up all their games. And so like in December, now keep in mind the tournament, when was the tournament? Like February? It gives a year.
February 2014 on the 24th.
Right.
Oh, this one was published. 1982.
Yeah. So in December of 1981, I'm living in Central Park, working with this coin dealer who's close to master, brown belt Taekwondo, and we'd go, I was doing 2-a-day workouts in the morning, go jog in the snow around Central Park, the reservoir, okay? And, but I also was preparing for white and black against each of these top players, okay? I think Ivan Radulov was there and so forth. And so I'd already made some of my decisions as to what I was going to play like 2 months before the tournament even happened. Like if I get black against Zoltán Ribli, what am I going to play in the Queen's Indian that he hasn't already played every month against Karpov and all the other great players that he plays month after month after month? And so I made the ballsy decision that I was going to play the Dutch defense, which sounds crazy, against one of the top 10 players in the world. But it was premeditated, okay?
Right.
I'd actually planned that 2 months in advance because I figured, and against Walter Brown, what am I going to play? This guy has all his opening systems down. I played the old, and played super solid. But anyway, so as far as the tournament itself, so I get the invite and get the whole list of participants. And then I board a plane that goes from New York has a 2-hour refueling stopover in San Francisco. And then from there, flies on to I think from there we went direct to Jakarta, to Indonesia. About like 13-hour flight from San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
So I do the flight to San Francisco. They announce that, we all need to deplane, stay in the boarding area. They're going to clean the thing, restock, refuel and everything, and be back in, like a couple hours. Go back, reclaim my seat. I'm sitting there. I got some magazine with magnetic set. I'm studying, whatever. Next thing, I look up, drawn down the aisle, Mr. Six-time U.S. champion Walter Brown. I'm like, holy cow. Next thing I know, he's coming right at me. Next thing I know, hey, anybody in that seat? I'm like, yeah, sure, Walter, go ahead. Turned out, what are the odds, Matthew? We totally had no idea each other was on the flight. And he was assigned the seat right next to mine. And he had the latest games where Kasparov and Sahis had the performance of his life, 1981 Russian championship. But Kasparov had captured everyone's imagination where he won, I think, 2.5 out of 3 with white on the white side of the Spotvinnik variation, where you go knight a4 on move 16 and sacrifice a knight and all this, and, very murky. And he'd won 2 games. So imagine for a young aspiring player, what could possibly be better than having a 6-time U.S. champion sitting there, and we spent the next 13 hours analyzing the latest Kasparov games. what could possibly be better? Right? And because Walter and I had seen each other before, and we play a little tennis, a little ping pong, a little billiards or whatever together, on downtime, go for walks, whatever, So anyway, I got off to an inauspicious start. I think I drew with black in about 13 moves or something on the black side of a Benko Gambit declined against Orestes Rodriguez. Walter chided me. Ron, that guy's like the weakest player in the tournament. How are you going to have a result if you draw with him? And I was like, okay, that was my wake-up call. That was my warm-up, okay? And then after that, we started working together. A round or two later, Matanovich. Now, today it's not so important, but back in the 60s and 70s, the Bible was the Shahovsky informant, okay? It was produced every 6 months in Yugoslavia, had 600 to 800 of the best games in the world, annotated by the best players. And that was kind of, the, standard, okay? Yeah. And so around 2 or 3, I'm black in a French defense, and I play Alexander Matanovich. This guy's the freaking editor, editor-in-chief of the Chess Informant, okay? But anyway, editor-in-chief or not, he makes a mistake of exchanging off the light squared bishops in an exchange, kind of a Tarrasch French where I got the IQP. Next thing I know, I sink one knight in on E4, I sink another knight in on C4, and I get a big bind, and then eventually I cash it into a superior endgame, but then it's adjourned, and I did not have tremendous experience in endgames at that time. But fortunately, Walter, and maybe he misplayed it slightly before the adjournment. And then in those days, you adjourn, I think, around move 60 or 56 or something, okay? After the, second session. And so we adjourned, but I still had a winning advantage. Anyway, Walter stayed up with me, and we worked it out all the way to the finish, a little finesse on the end. Like you get one of these situations where you're going to queen your pawn, you're going to win his rook, but now you're going to have to scuttle back with your king and stop his 2 passed pawns on the other wing. Very typical counterplay that has to be calculated and dealt with. But at one point, Walter found a move rook A4 where I could queen it with the rook, and recapture on A1 with the rook, leaving my king a square closer to get back and so forth. So Walter, he nailed this. I mean, by that time, he'd been playing international tournaments for so he had tremendous experience that I lacked, okay? Yeah. And so I won that game. So that was a little bit of a wake-up call. Then a couple of rounds later, remember I mentioned Zoltan Ribli, who played in the quarterfinals for the World Championship, one of Hungary's 3 or 4 best players. And during that period, Hungary was the only team that was able to challenge Russia in the Olympiad every year, because they had Ribli, they had Sachs, they had Portish, and they had a Dorian, and then 1 or 2 other, talents. And so, so then I beat Ribli with black in about 30 moves. And suddenly that was a little bit of a wake-up call to the rest of the tournament that, hey, this guy might not be going away so quick, because you see it all the time in tournaments. Some young upstart, quick out of the gate, but, then he gets his head handed to him a few times, and then that's it. And, he fades into oblivion, finds his rightful spot, So anyway, then the tournament turned into kind of a bit of a race. Myself, Murray Chandler was having a great result. Christensen was playing well, and Walter was like kicking butt and taking names. He crushed Ribli in a classic hanging pawns game on the white side of an A3 Queen's Indian. He several rounds later, he beat Miles in a adjourned game where it's like one of these things where he's got, what is it? He's got like he's like got a rook, and at some point he gives up his rook for the guy's bishop, for Miles' bishop, and then like 20 moves after the adjournment, he winds up with a position that looks like this. He's got a bishop on like F6 or E6, and pawns on like F6, G6, H6. Like 4 pawns and the black king on G8, like in a hopeless mating net in an endgame. Okay. And believe it or not, Walter and I had actually come to that position in our analysis, our adjournment analysis. And this position occurs like 20 moves after, the game is actually adjourned, okay? And we'd reached that position, and when he got to that position, Miles resigned, I think.
Wow.
So with white, Brown was a terror, okay? He was like mowing him down, like nobody's business, okay? And so when he actually played me, And I played an old Indian. We did not agree to draw beforehand because he didn't want to, well, we just didn't. But when I played the super solid old Indian and he saw I was in hunker down mode and it was going to be a long game, I offered him a draw and he thought about it and he's like, okay, I hate to waste a white, but but he also didn't want to spend 8 hours trying to beat me, So anyway, so amazingly enough, so it gets to the last round. There's a day off before the last round. Now, I think it was myself, Christensen, and Brown all tied. Christensen had the best pairing. He had white against Siddharanja. You'll see. He had white against one of the tail enders. I think one of the Indonesian players. I had black. No, I had white against Tony Miles. And Brown, I think, had black and had to win a Sicilian defense. So the three players, I think we were sitting on like 16 and a half or something. And Christensen clearly had the best pairing, like no question. Mm-hmm. And we had a day off before to prepare. Now, an interesting story there. The food was awesome. We played the tournament in 3 legs, okay? Oh, you're jumping ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, I'm just seeing like I was just scrolling. I was trying to scroll and scrolled the wrong way.
Oh, okay. But anyway, so we played the tournament in 3 legs. We played the first 9 games in in Jakarta. Then we went to a place, Yogyakarta, a few days in between. And then we started the second leg, which was, 9 games or something. And then the final stage was played in the Pertamina cottages. Now, if you're familiar with finance history a little bit, mm-hmm. In the early 1970s, OPEC formed the oil cartel. And when they had their first conference, these Pertamina cottages had been built to host all these sheiks and everyone from the Middle East. Okay. So let me tell you, it was not shabby. Okay. And then, of course, the conference had been and gone and whatever. And now it was open for, high-end visitors. And so that was where we played the third and final leg, mm-hmm. was at the Pertamina cottages. So it was very nice. So they had this buffet. So the day before, on the off day, I go there, for my lunch, somewhere around the middle of the day, around 11 or whatever. And over at one table is a number of the East European players, as Ron tries to be politically correct and fails miserably. So a number of the East European players, okay? And I'm sitting there, I come in, and all the other tables are big. Now we're talking about a pretty good sized dining room. And There's a big buffet spread out. And then the only player I see is, I forget, was I there first or Miles? Anyway, I think Miles comes in and there's no one, he gets his food or whatever. And then he's like, mind if I sit? I'm like, sure. Now, first place on the line.
Yep.
Ron sitting there, tied for first, talking to his next round opponent. What do you think these East European players are starting to assume?
Coercion.
The worst, exactly. Yep. And truth of the matter is, we just chatted pleasantly. I mean, I'd known Miles from before. I'd seen him in Manchester. He beat me in a tournament. In fact, I played in one tournament. It was like a weekend Swiss. And then part of my deal with the organizers had been I was supposed to do an exhibition. That Friday night, I get there to do the exhibition, and Miles shows up. And turns out they double booked us. And he was very gracious. He's like, Ron, you do it. I'm like, okay. And so I did it, I don't know, a couple £100, whatever it was, mm-hmm. okay, which was a lot of money to me. To him, it was, pocket change on a weekend tournament in between category 10 tournaments. Okay?
Yeah, and this is 1982,
and
too.
So, we knew each other. We were on decent terms. We did not talk about the game the whole day, except we made some comment that, yeah, they probably think we're tossing the game, Other than that, we didn't say anything, okay? Anyway, because these Europeans saw us having lunch the day before, they just assumed that the game was a toss job, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But tell you the truth, Matthew, a game this important, that's not how you want to win it. You want to play the game and whatever happens, happens. Now, the truth of the matter is Brown did a calculation because, Brown was a professional player. And I've never really mentioned this before. And he's like, Ron, look, I want you to get the grandmaster title. Okay. But it's going to cost me money. If you win the game, and I'm going to help you win the game, and it's going to cost me. And Brown, meanwhile, had beaten Miles the last 5 times in a row with white. You think I wanted his help? Oh, heck yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I said, Brown, Walter, come on, Sean, you tell me how much it's going to cost you for me to win this game. And, I'll pay you, to help me for this one game. So we struck a deal, which was fair because he's a professional. This is his income. And if he helps me win, it is going to cost him money. So I recognize that. And plus, there's no one else in the world at this time and moment. The guy's helped me. He's been there, supported each other, for 24 games over a month. This is the guy I want in my corner for this last game. So, of course, he's got me prepped. One time Miles played B6 against him, D4, B6. Another time he did this. Another time, man, Queen's Indian. He's got me like ready. So, best laid plans of mice and men, right? Time to play the game, 1 o'clock. And by the way, I was very professional. I had my whole routine, like what time I would get up, what time I would exercise. I would even lay my clothes out. I had 2 little twin beds. I'd lay my clothes out that I was going to wear the day before. I'd lay out what I was going to wear. I mean,
Super
you don't want to
regimented.
be running around 5 minutes before the match. Oh, that shirt smells. I can't wear that, whatever. You're smiling. You've been there, right?
Yep.
Let me throw on something, get down to the turn. No. And then I had my whole routine. I'd have lunch like at a certain time. You want to eat lunch, in my opinion, you don't want to eat 3 hours before because you don't want to be hungry during the game. Okay. I think maybe about an hour before, so that way you have time to digest and everything, but also not so far apart that you're hungry during the game. And then I would study tactics for about 90 minutes in the morning, for maybe 30, 40 minutes in the morning, certain amount of time on openings. But then I would lay down and I'd just lay in bed, take a short quasi nap. And then the very last thing, at Pertamina, we could walk to the tournament hall. I'd study one in-game composition, just one. Try to solve it, just to have clarity of mind, clarity of vision, And like I'm walking into the tournament hall thinking about this queen and knight versus queen and bishop and how you walk them all the way to the corner. Then you got this trick and you knight fork them and then you win the king and pawn in game. And I'm walking into the tournament hall and that's where my headspace is. I'm thinking about that. I'm not thinking about, oh, what if he plays this opening or how many rating points I'm going to lose or what's going to, no, I'm thinking about how the pieces just move majestically together and coordinate and so forth. And I got a very clear head. Okay.
Okay.
So now I'm about as ready as I could be. Bam. He plays knight c6. I play knight f3, still thinking, and now he goes d5. I'm like, oh crap. I haven't really prepared for this. Now, the irony is that in 1981, I had actually played the Chigorin against Yusupov in Lone Pine and actually made a draw where I was like 2 pawns up in a rook ending, but I didn't have a German help at that time. And then, of course, afterwards, Benko was like, oh, I would have helped you beat a Russian, Yeah, thanks, after the fact. Anyway, I play here and he goes there, and I'm like already starting to think about like what I should do. So now, of course, the most famous original game in the Chigorin defense is Lasker Chigorin, which Chigorin won. And they talk a lot about how he blockaded and barricaded with the knight. By the way, Andy Soltis years ago did a book on the Chigorin defense for Chess Digest. Well, I wouldn't call it a book in those days. They were really like pamphlets, okay? And that was the big classic game that they gave. And later I asked Soltis, do you really believe some of those evaluations you gave in that pamphlet? He just kind of smiled, that wry smile at me like, like that was one of those crank out jobs. But nonetheless, look, I managed to draw a great player like Yusupov with black, and I was actually better, Okay, so anyway, so I go for this variation, but then he takes. And then I take, and he takes, and I go here. And now I'm just strictly winging it. So now he goes here.
Okay, so when you're entering this game, he plays into the Chigorin, like, you have very little preparation?
Yeah.
Okay.
All my prep out the window. But on the other hand, what I did have was that I was in fantastic form. I was able to calculate long variations. I had very clear thinking, okay? And I wasn't lacking confidence. I mean, I wasn't overconfident. But on the other hand, I understood that a chess game, and especially at the lower levels. It's not like in the days of the chess informant, you'd be led to believe, like we used to kid about this guy, Florin Georgiou. He'd annotate 90 or 150 games in the informant.
Okay.
We used to kid that he had what do you call it? A pattern. White plays a new move, exclamation point. White's a little better. 5 or 6 moves later, white plays another exclamation point. Maybe black plays a dubious. Now, big advantage, plus over minus, okay? A few more moves, slightly weak move. Okay, now white's winning. Okay, that was his kind of prosaic formula,
Gotcha.
for annotating. A chess game is not like that, Matthew. A chess game, especially at the lower levels, and the lower you get, it's more like a winding road with many bumps and turns, okay? And so here's the thing. The best frame of mind to be in is where you're on a very level keel. You don't get too excited when you're winning. You don't get too depressed when you're losing, okay? Just have a very even temperament. If you ever watch the Polgars, Judith Polgar play blitz chess, you cannot tell whether she's winning or losing, okay?
No, just
and she
straight
just
up
keeps,
attack.
yeah, just keeps zapping out moves, okay? In positions that are hopeless, I would have trouble finding moves, and she just keeps, zipping out. And the reason it's the best to have an even keel is because when the opportunity does come, like as we'll see in this game, if you got a nice level mind and you're not clouded with, confusion and emotion and everything, then you're in position to take advantage of it, okay? But too many players, when they're winning, they get all giddy, and then that's when you're setting yourself up to a mistake. And also when they're losing, like you remember I mentioned this game in the Texas Junior Championship. Boy, was I depressed. Thank God the guy told me the winning move, rook to D1 check, right? But otherwise, so if you're too depressed or too ecstatic, you're not going to have the clarity of thought to take advantage when your moment is presented, okay? Now, look, if you're playing a Karpov or a Magnus in their prime, the opportunity may never be presented, okay? But playing most mortal humans, you're going to get some opportunity, okay?
How about
and Miles at this time, what was Miles' FIDE rating? He was probably close to 2,600 at this time. Keep in mind, ratings were much lower then.
Yeah.
So he might have been 2575 or something, but he was probably top 10 in the world at this time, okay? And so, keep in mind, Karpov and Kasparov were the first players to pierce, like after Fischer, 2,700 or something, okay? And I think there was a period where they were the only 2 players in the world, Fischer and Karpov, that were like over, even Spassky at his prime probably was 2610 or something, okay? So anyway, looking back, I don't know, what does the computer recommend here? Maybe Bishop G5?
Actually, the move you played.
F3?
Top move.
But now he plays E5. And when I take, I'm thinking, okay, he'll sack, I'll take, he'll have some compensation, I'll play my king up to C2, kind of shades of a C3 Sicilian type thing or something. Now the guy goes knight D7. I'm like, geez. Okay. So I go E4. Now I'm thinking he'll take the pawn back. Nope. He goes bishop B4. And I'm literally winging it move by move here. I go queen B3. Now he goes queen H4 check, loosening me up. I go G3. He goes queen E7. And I'm literally burning time thinking every single move here. So
what about him? Is he moving pretty quick?
Do what?
Was he moving pretty quick?
Yeah, he's playing pretty fast. Well, what to do? I don't want to go bishop G2. And then when he retakes this guy, the D3 square is horribly weak, okay? If I go bishop G2, I'm threatening to play F4. But I play bishop E2. Now he goes knight takes E5, gets his pawn back. And again, I'm calculating like a machine. I'm sitting here. I am not a happy camper. 1, nothing has gone as planned. 2, not really thrilled with my position. He's got all his minor pieces developed. And I got like nothing to show for it.
How do you feel now looking at it?
How's the value? Now I feel it's still unclear. Is it close to equal here?
It says white has a slight edge, very slight. Though.
Really? Wish you would have told me that 38 years ago.
It didn't like knight takes E5.
Oh.
Yeah.
What did it like here?
Long castles.
Yeah, that makes sense because look, he can get the pawn back on E5 later.
Mm-hmm.
And if I go f4, I'll just lose the e4 pawn.
Yeah,
Okay, so long castles make sense.
it's
Okay.
actually almost a half pawn, more than a half pawn advantage.
For black, you mean?
Yeah,
Okay.
and going up.
So fortunately, Miles did not play like Stockfish. Played knight takes d5. So I played bishop f4. That was after considerable calculation. You might think to play bishop d2 and castle queenside, but then again, when he castles, that d3 square is looking pretty shaky, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So what does it recommend here?
Just want to mention a comment here in the Twitch chat saying that you were all getting prepared for the game and you still had to pay Walter for this.
He deserved it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm benefiting from, him having 15 to 20 years of international experience. And keep in mind, he just crushed Miles the last 5 games with the white pieces.
Yeah.
Would you pay for that kind of coaching in the game of your life?
Absolutely.
Like without question, Okay, so.
Sorry, go
and
ahead.
I'll tell you, after 20 years on Wall Street, paying Walter Brown, a few $100s to prepare me was one of the best investments I ever made in my life. Okay.
That's true.
Yeah, no, you got to put things in perspective. Okay.
Right. You
Like,
want to
at that
increase your
point-
chances.
No, at that point, exactly. Because look, you got one game to achieve a once in a lifetime goal that you've worked and studied hours and hours and years for. And this is the one guy, as you exactly put, can increase your chances, even if it's by 5, 8, or 10%. And then also too, the confidence factor of knowing that I had him backing me, that he was there for me, helping me, rooting me on, was definitely much more psychologically better than spending 2 days like you're both camped out in your rooms, because you're hoping the other one doesn't win,
Right.
So anyway, I played bishop f4 here. What does the computer recommend here?
Bishop f4.
Oh, okay. Now he played knight back to g6. Now here, I could chill with the bishop and go back to d2 and then castle long. But
Actually, on your computer in the top right hand, there's a little bar you can click, and it will turn on the Stockfish for you.
a little top right hand.
Right, just below your name.
I'm not seeing it. Oh, inbox, board, language, sound, background, preferences, inbox.
Well, not on your name, but below your name. So exit exit the box.
I don't see it.
Huh.
Oh well.
Okay.
Anyway,
Anyway.
there's some other stuff down here, like opening repertoire, table base, practice with computer.
Nah, it's not that stuff.
Stuff down there.
Nah.
Anyhow.
All right. Oh well.
I castled. Does the computer agree with castling?
No.
No, it probably wanted me to play bishop back to d2, right?
That is correct.
Okay. Anyway, he took, I took, and I considered this position dynamically equal. Okay. I mean, I wasn't thrilled with it still. And now he played rook to d8. I don't know why he didn't just castle kingside. I think would have been perfectly okay for him. He played rook d8. Then I took. And he took with the king. And then one of the moves here is totally inexplicable. So I played knight d5.
Okay.
Now here he could take that. And then I could either play queen check, which some probably pretty high probability of a draw. Although, that endgame can be played. I mean, middle game, kind of bishop opposite color middle game. And by the way, that's another very important point, bishop opposite color. Petrosian, well, first Capablanca, then Petrosian, also Nimzovich, were great with bishops opposite colors, okay? And then, but today's players, if you notice, Fabiano Caruana and Magnus Carlsen, they win a lot of these rook and bishop versus rook and bishop opposite color, okay? They win a lot. If you start to make a mental note of it, you'll be surprised how many they win. So I'm fully expecting bishop takes, queen takes, and then I kind of got light squares, he's kind of got dark squares, and instead he played here, check. I went king over. Now again, if he takes, I can contemplate rook to d1, okay? Pinning, as opposed to just retaking right away, okay? And then I'm looking to try and open things up while his king is in the center. But now he played bishop back. And then I played rook c1. And he played queen to d6. Now, on rook c1, if he tries to simplify now by playing like this, I can take here. He takes on b3, I take, and then at least I'm going to snag a pawn. Okay? Yeah. Pretty good prospects. He's got to save the bish, right?
Yep.
That looks like the only legal square. And then I take, and, look, we got an extra pawn to work with. In a must-win game, you'll take it.
Yeah.
Now he goes rook to d1. Queen to d6. And now, rook to d1, a little quiet move. Now, remember we said dark squares and light squares, right? So if we look, we can see I'm all camped out on the light squares, you see? And so this is an important concept. I even start teaching kids at a young age, like right when you first teach them chess.
Yep.
Color concepts. Why not? Look, half the squares are light, half are dark, But it's amazing, Matthew, how many games I've won against masters where you just penetrate, take control of one color complex, and it's like you got an easy pass to zip around on those squares, okay?
Interesting.
And on top of that, their bishops, can't touch this, right? So see this dark squared bishop over here? Pretty useless, okay? But yet, for some reason, at most lower levels, they don't talk about color complex, okay? But it's actually, I'm sorry?
At my level, in the 1700 range, I think about it, but I don't put enough importance on it. I didn't think it was like, oh, you just think of one concept and you can actually just take down a whole person.
But here's the thing. Also, you can think certain openings, like the King's Indian defense, black is playing on the dark squares, white plays on the light squares. And so usually games where black triumphs, like Kasparov's sacrifice, knight takes f2, the dark square or something, and then games where white triumphs, it's usually penetration on the light squares, something into c6 or something, trading the light squared bishops and so forth. And so, but it's a very powerful concept if you start to incorporate it. If you study the games of Karpov, once he gets a winning position, notice how time and time again, suddenly it's like magic. All his pieces wind up on the light squares, and then the guy's dark squared bishop is like useless, okay? And it almost seems like magic until you actually stop and think about it, and then you realize it was actually magic / intentional or habit, okay? We'll see some of a lot of the same thing in Magnus's play, okay? So anyway, King E8. I think, is this where he played? One of these moves he played here was just like totally crazy. Now here he could play King C8, then I could play Knight B6 check, and I could pick off the queen, and then I take on F7. So anyway, he played King E8. Then I played this move, Bishop B5. And I forget if it was this move or the next move. Yeah, here he played Rook B F8. I'm not sure why.
Yeah, keep in mind, guys, this is about 40 years ago, so to remember ideas from that far, it's kind of difficult.
We get old, we forget things. Like here, I don't know what Rook F8 was all about. Or maybe it was his king takes on D8 that was really questionable. I forget. But anyway, I played Bishop B5. And then he played something. It was either here or the next move. He played Rook F8. And then I played Queen A4. And then I felt the table shake. It's true. I felt it like a little tremor. And next thing I know, I look up and everyone's like, we got to leave. And this is true story. This is true story. Oh, so we all exit the building at this point, okay? And then after about 10 or 15 minutes, there's no after effect or whatever. Then, okay, everybody can go back. We go back. Miles sits down. He starts studying the position, and he's like, wow, I didn't realize it was this bad. So anyway, but actually black's probably lost here. Surprisingly enough, there's no defense. And again, notice light square, light square, light square, light square, light square. And then I am attacking him on the light squares. And then I'm attacking this guy, you see? So the problem is his A5 bishop. Well, he can't play pawn to B6 to protect it. Obviously, the C6 bishop would be hanging, okay? And so what to do? If he moves the bishop, like say he plays bishop back to B6, well, then again, my rook's protected, right? I can just simply steal this guy, with a discovered attack from queen. Okay.
Mhm.
And so actually the position is Stockfish showing that I'm like +3 or something, probably.
It's +6, 7. It's ridiculous.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's even better than I thought, and every bit as bad as Miles had thought. So now in the game, he
But your
plays,
pieces are all on light squares again. Yeah.
yeah, he plays bishop takes after
Mhm.
some thought. Now I could play queen takes, and then on c6, take this. When he takes that, I take here, and then his situation is actually compounded because now he has to go queen to guard. He's got to guard that square. And
The
wherever
mating
he goes,
square. Yeah.
yeah, then I can just zig and zag, and this is going to be pretty quick somehow. There's probably a mate and 2 or something here. Let's see, e5 check. Yeah, I think you could do it this way. Check, something like this. Okay, there might
That
be
works.
something earlier and quicker. But so in the game, at this point, he played bishop takes. And so we agree I could play queen takes,
Mhm.
but I just took this guy. Because, when you're winning, keep it simple.
Okay.
I have 2 simple threats. I threaten queen takes, bishop check, and I threaten knight takes on c7, again, exposing the rook on the queen.
And protected.
I
Yep.
got 2 threats. So he played, after bishop b5, queen a5, he played queen c5, and then I got to hit him with this one. Check, check, and knight takes b5, and that's why we practice tactics in the morning for 30 minutes every day. Now Miles was very magnanimous. He was first to congratulate me because it was pretty clear that not only would I get the norm, I would actually get the title because they designed the tournament specifically for that. Now,
Okay.
I think FIDE may have made a very minor exception, that was lobbied for by the USCF to allow for, they'd never had a 25-round tournament, I mean, not since the days of like Hastings 1895 did they have such long tournaments. And so they made an exception and went ahead and, gave me the Grandmaster title. I think I had 25, my rating got up to 25-20. Probably I made a mistake at that point because I was waiting for the ratings to get published and catch up. And when I was in this kind of form, man, I should have just kept playing. I mean, like, bam, just keep. Instead, I stopped playing and just, I kept studying and everything.
Yeah.
But in those days, it was very hard to get invitations. And then I think the next big tournament I played in was Hastings, which had a very strong lineup. God, guys like Vaganyan, Tukmakov, Kovacevic, usual British players. And I messed up several promising positions. Like I was 2 pawns up in a rook inning against one of the British earlier. And so I had a pretty disappointing result. Although, that said, I did win a nice game against a young boy named Nigel Short. So to this day, my score is 1-0 against Nigel. Nigel has beaten Kasparov, so I'm close.
So now we have to check your Magnus number.
Exactly. Oh, who knows? That's probably far, far away. So I think we covered enough time. We had one other game, but I don't think we necessarily have to cover it. I think we did a good job. What do you think?
I think I'm always here if you want to do one more, or if you want to do another day, or we can end it. It's up to you. I mean, it's your time.
Maybe
Again,
maybe another time we'll do another show.
Sounds great. Yeah,
because
absolutely.
One of the great games in my experience was, during my work with Karpov, but maybe that's a subject for another day. Okay.
Possibly, and I think that would be great to do as a different segment altogether. I agree.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Anyway,
hey,
I think that pretty much covers anything. Anything else?
Ron, honestly, this was amazing. I loved it.
That takes you up to the moment. That was the game that got me the Grandmaster title.
All right.
You got to be able to see that 3-mover and dominate on the light squares and not get upset when the opening doesn't go as planned, right?
Just being sharp tactically, and yeah, it's like you were saying, it's just being better prepared than your opponents and just getting lucky.
Yeah, I think right in here when I played, and again, see the point about being in good form, keeping a level head. When the opportunity came up, the rest of the game, I don't know what the computer says, but the rest of the game from these points where I played like rook d1, rook c1, bishop b5, I think I probably played pretty close to flawless, and I took advantage of the moment, that was given to me. Okay.
Yeah.
So as far as the opening, I think Mike Tyson had a great quote. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the nose.
Yep, exactly. It's true.
So Okay, I'll let you go. By the way, I wanted to thank you for your technical help in, getting my own hen chest launched. I mean, huge, huge help.
No, absolutely,
Because,
anytime. Speaking of hen
and
chess, guys, go ahead and show your support to Ron Henley here. He has his own Twitch channel. I'm pointing at it right now. Hen chess. Go ahead and give it a follow. I'll put it into the chat box as well here. And yeah, he does great streams on there. He plays against people on ICC, right?
right.
ICC, if you guys don't know, is actually an excellent program. I've been using it quite a bit recently. It's nice and old school type of learning to me, and I really like that because everyone's all on the computer now, all digital, and it's like, no, pull out a regular board and pull out a book, you know, be normal.
So yeah, the general format there, Matthew, is that we do well, the last 4 or 5 shows we've been doing a short 15-minute presentation on Rook-in games. Rook-in games, very important. Minev wrote a book in around 2003, and he said in tournament play, Rook-in, because of the survivor, gene starting out in the corner, tend to occur in about 50% of all in games in tournament play. Now, they might be slightly high, but nonetheless, it shows the importance. Well, and as you showed, Magnus Carlsen, 2013 World Championship, Rook-in game, game 6, huge. Okay.
I'm glad you brought that one up too. I'm going to be studying those games. Actually, I'm going to go through this entire interview, write down everything that you said. Go ahead and check this out. And I was like, all right, I'll go and do this.
Okay. Okay, so are we good to go?
Yeah, we're good to go. So,
I get lunch?
Ron, yep, exactly. And some Starbucks.
Matthew, thank you for having me. And thank all our viewers for taking time to check in on us. Okay.
Absolutely.
And appreciate it.
Have a great evening.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.
Talk to you later.
You can skip this ad